Are you a creator or streamer looking for the perfect beginner microphone? Whether you're on a budget or need the best audio quality or just need something easy to operate, today we're going to compare three very popular options: the Fifine K688, the Rode PodMic, and the Shure MV7. By the end, hopefully you'll know exactly which one of these mics will suit your needs, because I'll be sharing my top pick for which one of these microphones is worth the investment. And a big thanks to Riverside for partnering on today's video. And as we go throughout the video, I'm just going to be cutting between each different mic so you get a bit of an idea of what each one sounds like in action. For reference, I've got the Fifine and the MV7 both plugged in via USB, and then the PodMic is plugged in via XLR, basically because that's kind of how they're designed to be used out of the box. Alright, so first of all, let's talk about the design and build quality of these three different microphones, because they do range quite a bit. Now, starting out with the Fifine, it's kind of a combination of metal and plastic, and overall I would say this one definitely feels like the cheapest microphone, but despite that, in terms of the amount of money you're actually paying for this microphone, I actually think it's a really good deal. The metal definitely feels on the thinner side, but it doesn't feel like they've skimped on build quality when it comes to the materials. It feels well constructed while also being on the budget end. It's also relatively light, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing. I am actually quite a big fan of the overall design. It looks quite nice. I like the grey and the black aesthetic. I also quite like the shock mount design. I think the main downside when it comes to build quality with the Fifine is probably where it attaches to your boom arm. This does feel a little bit plasticky, but again, I'm definitely not disappointed considering the price point of this mic. Now, moving up slightly in price, we've got the Rode PodMic, and this one to me is a huge contrast in overall build quality. This one feels like it's built like an absolute tank. It's actually quite heavy. Almost all of the components are made of metal, with the exception of just a couple of things like the tightening knobs on the side, but these feel like really high quality plastic. And I've said it in my previous review videos of the PodMic, I think this thing is built to last. Like, I think it will last easily 5 to 10 years. In terms of the overall design, I think when I first saw it, I wasn't as crazy about it, but over time, it's actually really grown on me. I actually really like the kind of old school, timeless, classic look that the PodMic has. It doesn't have a removable pop filter like the Fifine does, but again, I don't necessarily see that as a downside. It's kind of one less component to worry about, which is kind of a good thing in my opinion. And overall, I just think it's a really solid microphone when it comes to the build quality and the design. Then lastly, moving on to the Shure MV7, which is the most expensive of these three mics. I would say it sits kind of somewhere in between the first two mics, although definitely on the PodMic side when it comes to quality. So overall, I would say it's not quite as solid as the PodMic, but definitely a lot more solid than the Fifine. Similar to the PodMic, it's mostly made of metal with the exception of a couple of components like the tightening knobs on the side. This one does have a removable pop filter. The actual mic casing underneath feels really solid. And in terms of weight, again, it's somewhere in between the first two mics. It's not super heavy like the PodMic, but it's not really light like the Fifine. In terms of the design, I'm a fan. I think it looks sleek, kind of understated, but in some ways, maybe just because it's a little bit of a smaller form factor than the Fifine, it kind of feels like it's not quite as premium somehow, even though this is the more expensive microphone. But overall, I think the winner for me probably is the Rode when it comes to the design and build quality. And especially when you consider how much money you pay for it, I think it's an absolute bargain. So as you can see, these mics overall offer solid build quality, which is key for any serious content creator, but great gear alone isn't enough to get that perfect sound. Another really important thing that a lot of people forget about is how you actually record. Because no matter how great the microphone, if your recording setup isn't solid, it's not going to sound good. I've seen plenty of content creators invest in really high-end microphones, but end up with subpar audio because they record on devices and platforms that don't fully preserve the audio quality. One thing to definitely watch out for is using traditional video calling platforms like Zoom that often heavily compress your audio, which ruins the quality that you've probably paid top dollar to achieve. That's why if you're doing remote interviews, podcasts, or any type of remote recording, you need a platform that's going to record your audio at its best without bad compression. Now, I use Riverside for all of my remote recordings, including my own podcast. It's an all-in-one platform that allows you to record, stream, and edit all of your content right within your web browser in the highest quality possible. It's able to do this by recording your audio and your video locally onto your computer, meaning you get uncompressed studio quality files, which then get uploaded separately. And with Riverside, you can also automatically generate captions for your videos and then use the editor to add music and overlays. Whether you're a YouTuber, doing remote interviews, or hosting a podcast, Riverside makes it easy to keep your production polished and professional. If you want to try it out, I've got an exclusive discount with the code NICK20 to get 20% off your subscription of Riverside. Just click the link in the description and you can even try it out for free with a free account. It's personally saved me tons of time without compromising quality. So I hope it will for you as well. But of course, the design isn't all that matters when it comes to microphones. You've also got to consider the features. So let's talk about some of the different features of these mics. Once again, starting off with the Firefine. So in terms of connectivity, you can plug it in via USB-C, which is really nice because that's quite modern. It's going to connect to most modern laptops and computers. You can also connect it via XLR, which is a very nice option to have, especially on a microphone of this price point. You can also plug in your headphones directly so you can get audio monitoring live. Then you can adjust your monitoring levels with a little knob as well as your gain levels. So that's two very nice additions to have right on the microphone itself because it does give you that bit of extra fine control. The Firefine also has a mute switch on top, which is very prominent, which changes color depending on whether it's muted or unmuted. Then moving on to the pod mic. This one is actually pretty feature slim. It's purely got an XLR out port. It's got no headphone monitoring controls. It's got no gain controls built in. It's just the mic and an XLR port. That's essentially all that it's got. So if you're looking for lots of onboard features, the pod mic might not be the microphone for you. Then finally, we've got the Shure MV7. This one also has quite a few features. So this one features a touch panel, which enables you to control the monitor levels because you can also plug in your headphones into the back. It also allows you to control the gain of the microphone. It's also got a mute switch, which is really nice. And then again, the MV7 has XLR out as well as micro USB out. Now, micro USB is definitely on the older side, and I've mentioned in previous reviews that I found the cable that came with the mic has gotten a little bit bent over time, so it tends to fall out a little bit. I wish the MV7 had USB-C like the Firefine. The other thing to mention is that the Shure MV7 has associated software which you can install onto your computer, and you can use this to do things like change the preset EQ and even record directly to your computer. That's the Shure Motive app. That's what I'm recording this microphone through right now. So I consider that kind of an extra feature of the MV7. So for me, the winner when it comes to overall features, I would probably argue is actually the Firefine. And that's mainly because I really like the knob control of the microphone gain and the headphone output instead of the touch panel. The touch panel can be a little bit finicky to use. And I also really like the USB-C. It's very hard to beat USB-C in this day and age. But even more important than the actual features of these microphones is arguably how good they sound. So let's talk about the actual sound quality of these three microphones. And one thing that a lot of beginners might notice is any background hiss. And that's something that can really destroy your audio quality very quickly. This is often caused by too much gain in the microphone or just a lower quality microphone overall. Now I'm going to start off with the best and then go to the worst when it comes to this. So the absolute best is the Shure MV7 in my experience. When you have it set to pretty normal gain levels, either on USB or on XLR, there's almost no background hiss, which is pretty amazing. When you start to boost the gain a bit, you do start to introduce a bit of a background hiss, but it's still pretty manageable. Next, in my experience, was the Rode Pod mic. This definitely has some more noticeable background hiss just at standard gain levels. Overall, to me, it's totally acceptable. You can probably EQ it out pretty easily. Same deal, when you boost the gain on this mic, it does increase that background hiss a bit, but I think overall it's still quite manageable. Now, when it comes to the Firefine, I had two different results depending on whether I was using USB or XLR. So when I was using XLR, it was actually pretty similar, I found, to the Pod mic, maybe slightly better. So at normal gain levels, the Firefine had pretty manageable background hiss. However, I first started to notice a bit of an issue when I boosted the gain and stepped back from the Firefine a bit. That's when I noticed more of a background hiss. And it was a bit more noticeable, I think, than the Pod mic. However, the big problem came when I was recording through USB, which is what I'm doing right now. And even at standard gain levels, the background hiss on this microphone was relatively significant to the point where it was quite noticeable, even with a bit of background music. And then when I boosted the gain through USB, the hiss was pretty much unusable. Like, it was quite loud and very noticeable. So I think that's something definitely to keep in mind with the Firefine. If you're planning on using it with USB, you will definitely have a noisier audio signal than you would if using it just with XLR. Now moving on to background noise rejection. So currently there's actually some construction noise outside my window. I've got a whole bunch of construction happening. So you might be able to pick up on that as I go through these mics. But that's actually a really good test to see how well each of these mics can reject background noise. Now, once again, my experience was that the MV7 was by far the best. It not only removed heaps of that background hiss, when I was doing some testing earlier, I was picking up pretty much no construction noise coming from the next block over. Once again, I found the Pod mic to be second. It was decent when it came to that noise rejection, but I could hear a bit of that construction noise coming through. And when I stepped back from the mic, there was a little bit of echo being picked up from my room. And then again, I found the Firefine to be the worst when it came to background noise rejection. It seemed to be the most sensitive when it came to picking picking up that construction noise. It was okay, but it was definitely less pronounced than the other two microphones. Now lastly, let's talk about the actual sound quality from each of these and the sound signature. And I'm actually really interested to hear your thoughts on which one you think sounds the best. So I'm not going to go in order of which I think is best. I'm just going to go in random order. So let's start with the pod mic. This is what it sounds like through XLR with basically no EQ added. So I've added a bit of compression and a limiter just so it's equal volume to all the other mics, but I haven't EQ'd anything. This is what it sounds like coming out of the box. To my ear, it's a little bit mid-range heavy, and as a result, sounds a little bit muffled sometimes, or maybe not quite as well-rounded as I'd like it to. However, once I've EQ'd it like I have now, I think it sounds excellent. It sounds quite warm and well-rounded. It's got a little bit more punch, I think, on the high end, which is probably good for me to give me some extra clarity because I tend to mumble a bit, but that is the Rode Pod mic. Now let's move on to the Fifine. So this is currently coming through the USB, which to me, I think sounds decent, although it does sound a little bit muffled. I think that's partly because of that background hiss that you get through the USB. Now this is how the Fifine sounds, being recorded through XLR, and this is with no EQ, and I actually think it sounds pretty decent. It's definitely got a little bit more low end, and it's not quite as clear on the high end in my experience, but overall it sounds quite decent. And then this is what it sounds like once I've applied some basic EQ to the signal, and honestly I actually think it sounds really good. Tell me what you think in the comments. It's really quite warm and actually kind of reminds me of the Shure SM7B, which is kind of like the gold standard for microphones. So I think that says a lot about this mic considering its very cheap price point. And then lastly, the Shure MV7. This is currently being recorded through USB using the natural preset EQ. And again, I think it's kind of similar to the pod mic, and then it's a little bit mid-range heavy, but overall I think it sounds quite nice. It's quite warm, and I'll definitely be happy with this audio signal. So now I'm currently recording the Shure through XLR. And I think to me, this is when it sounds the most balanced. It sounds quite well-rounded, it sounds quite warm, and I think it sounds pretty good. And then once I've EQ'd it, I actually think it sounds pretty similar to the Fifine, but maybe not quite as warm. So overall, out of the box, I think in terms of which one you're going to get the best sound quality from without having to do too much extra work, I think it's going to be the Shure MV7, and it just overall sounds really quite decent. Then I think it's probably going to be the Fifine after that. I think with USB, it doesn't sound bad apart from that background hiss. And so to me, the key thing is just making sure you're sitting quite close to the Fifine. And then finally, the pod mic is probably going to be the most work because you're going to have to put the most amount of EQ on this in post. You can use it straight out of the box, but it's not going to sound as nice as it could if you do some basic EQ. So in my opinion, which is the best sounding? To be honest, I actually think I might go with the Fifine. I think it actually sounds really quite nice, but with the caveat that it's only when you're sitting quite close to it. If you sit back a bit and try and record yourself from a bit of a distance, you do introduce too much background gain and noise, and it just kind of falls off pretty quickly. So with that said, let's talk about the actual price and value for money when it comes to these mics. So the Fifine is currently the cheapest at around $70 US. Then you've got the Rode at about $90 US, and then finally the MV7, which comes in at double the price of $179 US. And to be honest, I was trying to decide which one I think is the best value for money, and it's actually kind of hard to say because they all kind of have different strengths and weaknesses. I think the Rode Pod mic is probably the best value for money overall when you consider the build quality and the sound quality. They're both really solid. I think the big downside is that it's going to be harder to use for beginners because you're going to have to get an external USB interface to be able to plug it into your computer since it's only XLR. Plus, you're going to have to spend more time EQing in post. So if you're kind of a semi-pro or professional content creator, the pod mic might be a good choice. Now, previously I would have said the Shure would have been worth the price considering it's significantly more expensive than the other two microphones. But now that I've used the Fifine, I think this overall sounds really nice. I think what the MV7 has over the Fifine is that background hiss, which makes it overall a more versatile microphone. I'd much more confidently use this in a range of different scenarios, especially if there's any background noise instead of the Fifine, just because I think it's going to be more reliable basically. Which kind of leads me to my use case recommendations, starting off with a mic that I think is best for podcasting. And I would argue that probably the MV7 might be best for podcasting, again because of that versatility, so you can take this into different setups and use it confidently with different people, different speakers, and you know it's going to be reliable. When it comes to the best microphone for streamers, I actually think the Fifine might be the best because chances are if you're streaming, you're going to be sitting at a desk with the microphone at a fixed position in front of you, and that's when you're going to get the best audio quality out of the Fifine. So I think if you're a streamer, especially if you're on a budget, I think the Fifine could be a really solid option. And then lastly, if you're a YouTuber, obviously I'm a bit biased, but I think the pod mic might be the best because if you're recording YouTube videos like this, you've got time in post to go audio and really dial it in to match your voice, create a preset, and just make sure you're maximizing audio quality, which is why I recommend the Pod Mic for YouTubers. So finally, which is my personal favorite, which one do I recommend the most? I think I'm still honestly going to go with the Pod Mic for now. It might change in the future. I think these other two microphones are still great choices. And again, I hope what I've conveyed is that what it really comes down to is your use case, as well as your own particular experience level. And hopefully by watching this video, you've got a better idea of which one might suit you best. So over to you. Let me know in the comments which one you think is the best, which one do you think sounds the best, and which one you're going to be buying. Don't forget to check out Riverside using the link in the description. And if you decide to look more into the Rode Pod Mic, then check out my full review of the Pod Mic right here in case you're keen to hear more about it.